It's just a lot of knowledge about kind of how not to look like a douchebag out on the trail. Just some basic rules of the road that we call it if you've never been off-roaded before. So we call it trail etiquette. And again, in your handout in your bag, there's a little trifold that actually goes through some of this stuff as well. It's a little bit shorter than what I'm going to go through today, but myself and Derek are going to go through this class. So the first thing, and we mentioned it before, AOP has a great trail map and a great system that's very well marked. Not all off-road parks will be like that. So make sure before you get out on the trail that you kind of know how to read the signs. Here they are color-coded, which most off-road parks are. Blue, green, red, black. Just make sure you know how to read those signs before you get out there. A lot of them have free maps, but again, you go and off-road on places that are not designated parks either. Make sure you know how to, read the signs. Out west, there's a lot of signs that say, enter at your own risk beyond this point, body damage likely. That just kind of self-aware, but make sure you know what you're getting into. The second one is tread lightly. So here, there are marked designated trails. It's really important that you stay on the trail. And don't venture off on your own and blaze your own trail. Out again, when you get off of off-road parks, is even more important because you're out in national land. They're real big about it out in Colorado. They don't want you, off-roading over this flower that's, endangered and you could disrupt the ecosystem. But same thing when you're in off-road parks. They have trails for a reason. They don't want you to go blazing off on your own. A big one that's come up lately, if you've been on our Facebook page or other Facebook pages, you'll see people really coming down on people riding in rivers and streams. It's really important. Sometimes, the roads are that you cross over a stream, and that's the way the road is. There's no way around it, and that's fine. But there has been other times, and especially if you're an off-roader who's not educated enough to know any better, a lot of people just take up the river and be like, oh, this is fun, we're in the water. People love taking their Jeep in the water, which I get, you splash, it's fun. But it is very damaging to the riverbed system when you do that. So that's a big no-no in the off-road community is don't take up and start just driving up any creek or river, especially it can get you into private property and things like that. So it's best just not to get out and do that. Pack it in, pack it out. You'll see a lot of people get out of their rigs, and if there's trash on the trail, just go ahead and pick it up. Make sure we're not littering. The Jeep community is really good about that. We're really strong on that, is to make sure that we're not out littering on the trail. People have lunch, have drinks. Make sure you have a trash bag in your vehicle. They make some cool ones that you can hang off your rear tire. You'll probably see a lot of them. I didn't bring mine today. But they make some super cheap ones, some really nifty ones you can hang on the back of your tire so it's not even inside your Jeep. And if you see trash on the ground, pick it up. That's what we kind of preach as an off-road community to keep and do.
Those big sacks you're talking about?
Yeah.
They are also great that in the event that you break something and it's greasy, nasty, muddy, grungy, whatever, you can take your trash out, put it in your buddy's trash bag, and put all your greasy, nasty stuff in it. Keeps it out of your Jeep.
Goes with muddy clothes too.
Yeah.
And muddy boots.
Yep.
I love putting my trash in other people's trash bags.
I'm a fan of that.
Yeah, no, for real. Thank you for having a trash bag on the back.
I just use backwards.
So the next one is a really, really important rule is watch your back. So one of the golden rules that we have on the trail is to never lose sight of the person behind you. You have to constantly remind yourself of that. I mean, even those of us that have been operating for a while, I'll hear them on the CB be like, Holly, where'd you go? I'm like, oh shit, I'm sorry. I wasn't watching. person behind you, that's where CB radios come in important. If not, you can always honk your horn, yell. If you're like me, I'm loud enough, people can usually hear me up and down the trail. I know, right? Whatever that is, it's just important, again, because we don't want to leave anybody behind. That person could be struggling in a bind, whatever that is. It's just really, really important that you don't lose sight of the vehicle behind you.
That being said, that happened on one of our new people rides. We were coming down a really steep hill, so actually we encouraged a lot of distance because it was slippery, and we didn't want people to be running into each other. And there was a guy behind me, and I turned the corner, and I stopped, waiting for him to come down, and then came back out. He had gotten slid down in a rut, you know, and plopped his Jeep on the side, you know. So that's very important to keep sight of who's behind you. So it was taking a little bit of time, and I got out, and I was like, oh my gosh, you know, freak out moment. It's a new member, you know, and it can happen. Not trying to scare you guys, but it's a chain reaction. So if you don't have a CB and you lose sight of the person behind you and you stop, the person in front of you will stop too, and that will go up the line no matter how many Jeeps we've got. Even if you don't have a radio, ideally, if you're
That's the way it should work.
if you're following what we're saying, then you won't need a radio. You'll say, hey, they're stopped. What's going on? And if it takes more than like 5-10 minutes, like, hey, there might be a problem. Okay?
Yeah, it's very, very important. You got something.
And you don't want to have to necessarily back down a trail if you have to pull someone. If they're behind you and you have to help get them through something where there's not a good way to winch or it's muddy, backing down a trail can be scarier, especially if you can't see. Tight turns, you have lots of trees. When you're going forward, you have better visibility. When you're trying to do it looking over, you know, through a roll cage and a spare tire that's blocking your vision, you know. So keep that distance, keep that in mind, because you might be the person helping someone else, you know, and it's the same for the person in front of you. That's why the trail leader, they normally scout the trails before they do a ride, so they know any obstacles, so, because they don't have someone in front of them, but they've done the research to kind of plan, you know, for something like this. It's not always the case, but just keep that in mind too.
And you can take a wrong turn. If you don't know where the person in front of you, we've had that happen on a ride.
That only happens on night rides, Tammy, okay?
No. Sydney and I were in the Jeep together, and we kind of ended up going slow on an obstacle because I was trying to figure out my line, and the person ahead had went and they had made the turn and they were out of my sight. And so when we got there, we're like, do we go straight? Do we go left? Do we go right? And luckily I was able to get on the CB and figure out where everybody is. But if you don't see where that Jeep ahead is and you don't know where you're going, you can easily get lost.
For sure.
If there's a turn,
And then you're going to
wait at
take
the
everybody
turn.
behind you with you.
Yeah.
And then they're not going to be happy.
Yeah, that's a good point because, like Derek said, if there's a turn, before you make that turn, just make sure, all the time make sure there's somebody behind you, but especially when you're making a turn, you know, make sure there's somebody behind you. Again, that's a super duper important rule, so I really wanted to stress that part, and I'm glad, you know, we had a couple interjections and examples because it really is that important. Robin mentioned very briefly, along with that, make sure that you do keep a safe distance between your vehicle and the vehicle in front of you. I remember when I first started off-roading and I had no clue on how to pick a line or, you know, where your Jeep, knowing where your like differential, which is your lowest part of your Jeep, is on your Jeep. Line that up of where that is on your hood so you know that's the lowest part of my Jeep. You're coming up on a big rock. You want to kind of put your tire on that rock versus your differential to, you know, kick it up on. But give that person in front of you enough room that if they need to back up and try the obstacle again, or like Robin said, if you're coming down an incline and they stop, you don't want to be so close to them that you can't stop and end up, you know, bumping them. I've seen that before too. But I just remember, you know, I wasn't sure what my Jeep was going to do, so I wanted to make sure and be really close to that Jeep so I could see what their Jeep did, so I could do the same thing. And then I learned, hey Holly, get off my ass, okay? You're too close to me. Oh, my bad, I'm sorry. So just make sure that you're not too close to that person when you're making them uncomfortable what their Jeep's gonna do.
And there are people that have manuals, so there's
Yes.
gonna be that rollback factor as well. Which is
I learned
Which
that
we've
with Robin
had
for
that
starting her
happen
manual.
several times. People with a manual park, stop on a hill and get out, and it would roll back into the vehicle behind them
Yep.
several times.
So the other one on, kind of respecting your fellow off-roaders, another topic. When you're coming through parks, make sure, keep it slow. You'll see some signs around here, keep it slow. It gets super dusty in the summer in a lot of places you off-road. You don't want to be that jerk, right? Driving through camp at 40 miles an hour, spreading dust over everybody, pisses everybody off. We're going to go over CBs in a minute. Make sure you're keeping it PG on the CBs. You might be in a group that have kids in their vehicle, so you always want to be mindful of that. Troy might have touched on this in his winching class. I'm not sure. When you're wheeling with a group, especially the bigger the group, keep in mind, everybody wants to make it over the obstacle, right? Nobody wants to be winched, even though there's nothing wrong with it. Everybody wants their Jeep to make it over that obstacle. However, once you've tried it once, twice, 3 times, know when to say when. If people are encouraging you to keep trying and you don't feel comfortable, again, like Kevin said, or somebody, it's your vehicle, you're in control of your own vehicle. If you don't feel comfortable doing it, don't. Hey, I'm ready to pull cable. I'm ready to pull a line. Somebody can help me out. But the larger group you're in, it's just be mindful of how many times you've attempted an obstacle. Because again, you might have 6 vehicles behind you that's got to get up that same obstacle. And it can turn, a 30-minute trip into a 3-hour trip if, your vehicles, you want to try it 10 times. So just keep in mind of that. The good rule of thumb is try it 3 times. If you haven't made it by then, pull cable or take the bypass. But if you're in a smaller group and you guys got all day to wheel and you want to, figure out what your Jeep can do, there's nothing wrong with that too. So you're kind of your own boss on that.
And Holly, I'll just add, if you need help, like if you're new, like that's okay. Like don't feel bad if you need to try it 3 times or you're taking a little bit longer. Like that's what we're here for. That's the purpose of Boobs and Noobs. That's a big part of the day. So don't feel bad. It's okay.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up because nobody wants to be that person to put anybody out, right? You don't want to be that person that keeps the whole group lagging behind because your Jeep's not having a good day. You might not be having a good day. You feel like the jerk that's causing everybody held up. 9 times out of 10, if you know the group of wheelers you're with, they're not going to care. I can tell you how many times where, I had some friends that had, a lot bigger built Jeeps than me. They're like, Holly, come out and wheel with us. And I'm like, I don't want to hold you guys up. I mean, I have smaller tires. I didn't, might not have lockers at the time. I'm like, I don't want to be that person that holds up the entire group. They're like, we want you to come out. We want to see what your rig can do. So don't be afraid, like Beth said, if you're struggling a little bit, it is no big deal, especially today. It is no big deal whatsoever. That's what we're here for. So
along that line, don't be afraid to ask for a spotter.
Yes, if you don't feel
Learning
comfortable.
the visibility you have in front of your vehicle until you know what's where, having a spotter who can guide you and say, put your wheel over this way, so that's invaluable.
And those are all really good learning points for you. This like we keep harping. This is about you guys learning how to off-road your Jeep. So you're not gonna know what you're doing. You're gonna feel that pressure. We don't want you guys to feel that at all. I mean, there are people a little more shy and reserved. They aren't gonna say anything, and that's what's gonna get you in trouble. If you feel like something isn't right, even if it's just a random noise all of a sudden you hear, stop what you're doing and ask for help. Because that's what we're here for. And then if you have a spotter that spots you through an obstacle, they're gonna be saying, I want you to put your tire on this rock here, blah, blah, blah. Then the next time you go, you're gonna be like, oh yeah, that's where the spotter said, I want you to do this. And you'll be able to get through that obstacle without a spotter. So this is all learning points. We want you to take it all in and not feel bad because you are learning. And we've all been new at one time. And it's intimidating. It's intimidating. I know from experience, when I first came out to Jeeps and Wrenches, I had a bone stock Jeep. I never been mudding or anything. And I will roll up in Holly's Jeep and, you know, Kevin's Jeep and all, they're like freaking miles in there, and I'm like, oh my God, what am I getting myself into? And many of you might be feeling that way right now, just rolling up in here with this park full of built Jeeps. Your Jeep is very capable stocked, and you will be impressed yourself with what your vehicle will do today on this mountain. Don't be afraid to ask questions.
And don't necessarily follow the line of the Jeep in front of you. Pick your own line. It might give you good reference, but every Jeep's going to be different. The experience level of the person in front of you is going to be different. So the line Holly takes might not be the line I would take, might not be the line Robin takes. You know, you'll learn that more as you go along. But starting out, last year, Boobs and Noobs was my first time in a Wrangler off-roading. And watching the different lines, because you'll see up the trail, you can see how different people did different things. A 2-door is going to behave different than a 4-door. A manual is going to be different than an automatic. Mud trains versus all trains, it's always going to be a little different. You can get some good reference, but don't follow the lead. It's not, again,
Don't always follow the line of the vehicle. And I promise I'll shut up.
Take it up all the time, Robin.
And that was why that Jeep ended up flopping on that one hill that I was talking about. I have a TJ which has a more narrow wheelbase, so I avoided that rut altogether. I just stayed on flat ground and went all the way down. Plus I have a lot more wheel time than he did. And then he tried that same line with his JK, which was wider base, and he slid down into the rut. So if you are going to follow a line of a person in front of you, try to follow a line of a very similar setup. Like they were saying, you know, you want to follow one that's very similar to your own Jeep, because it's a similar wheelbase, it's a similar setup, it's going to behave very similarly over opposite.
It's a lot of similarities in one sentence.
I know.
I'll let it go though. All right, last thing before we get into radios, because we got about a good 10 minutes left before we're going to break for lunch. The last thing I want to say, and I think it was touched on before, is leave no man behind. If you see somebody broken down on the trail, if you're with a group, we never, ever, ever leave anybody on the mountain broken down. If we have to leave the rig, we leave the rig. You know, there are a lot of guys and girls in this club that are phenomenal with trail fixes and how to get your rig down the trail on a wing and a prayer. Duct tape and zip ties are great. But don't leave anybody behind. You know, make sure they're capable. If they're like, hey, we want to stay up on the mountain and wheel a little bit more, make sure they have somebody with them, make sure they're capable. But we never, ever, ever want to leave somebody behind. If somebody is broken down on the trail and you don't know how to fix it, get on the horn, get on the radio, figure something out, but never leave that person behind. That's another very, very, very important rule. If it's a complete stranger, we have been where we've had 2 Jeeps in, and, you know, I think it's what did you do on your drive shaft when you were screaming at me?
I broke my drive shaft.
You broke your drive shaft. And we couldn't get it out. We can pull, and this buggy pulls up and says, hey, you guys need some help. You know what? Yeah, we do. Can you come over and help us? So if you see somebody broken down on the trail, even, you know, if your phone has a better connection, you just never know what the situation's going to be. Always make sure you offer help or offer to come back down the mountain and get them help. That's one thing that I will say about the off-road community is really, really, really good at doing. Is having each other's back and helping each other out. So that's one thing I wanted to stress.
Case in point, 3 years ago, we had somebody here the first time ever off-road. They were in an older TJ, didn't even make it up to the top of the hill on the main trail. The cam sensor went out. It wasn't that they got out in trouble or cam sensor went out. The Jeep quit. We went to the parts store. We got the guy parts. We still had problems. Troy ended up loading the Jeep on his trailer and carried him all the way back to Nashville, Murfreesboro. So, I mean, you will find, and it's kind of a saying you hear a lot of, but it's really true. The Jeep community is a lot like family, and they will go beyond measures to try to help you in any situation. So it's pretty phenomenal.
Yep, I agree. It's one of the coolest things about being in off-roading communities that's up there. So,
Wait, one more thing.
Oh, yeah.
So on right away, if who has right away, we're going up and down the trail.
Sure.
Encounter somebody.
yeah.
I was gonna let you two talk right now.
Yeah, Holly.
Yeah, Holly. Okay, so does anybody know who has the right of way when you're on a hill? Kevin.
Person coming down,
Person coming down. Why is that?
they have less control.
So, make sure when you're going up and down a hill that, and you'll see it a lot of times on these trails, smaller groups will pull out of the way if they see a big group coming. They'll make room and kind of, get over a little bit. You always want to let them know, hey, I got, 10 rigs coming up, where they're at in the group, who they're at. But you never know, somebody coming down the hill could have broken an axle or what have you. You always want to make sure they have the most momentum, that you get out of their way. They have the right of way. So, good point.
And then as, if you're in the back, or as you go past the group, you let them know how many vehicles are behind you so that they know when they can get back onto the trail.
Yeah.
Generally, if you meet another group or you meet one Jeep, the person in the front will hold up 4 fingers, 5 fingers, however many you got, Sometimes you may have to tell them, hey, I got 10 behind me,
Yeah. And once again, that's just being courteous, right? Like I told you in the beginning, how not to be the douchebag on the trail. It's just being courteous and letting people know, hey, you pulled over for me. I'm the last one here. You can get back down on the trail. So,
And on
common
top of
courtesy.
that, sometimes you might inherit a Jeep in your group. If someone's up there by themselves and they're like, hey, look at this group, you might add another one into the convoy.
Happens
Tell
all the
CD
time.
channel
Yeah.
and-
Quite often.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a great thing. That's how you get to meet people.
Absolutely.
Especially on things like the Southern Four-Wheel Drive events where it's not necessarily Jeeps and wrenches. You'll have a mixture of people from different states, different rigs.
Absolutely.
But-
Matter of fact, I've got a group that I will with. There's about 8 or 10. They're from Indiana and Kentucky, and I met them at a Jeep Jamboree. Been riding with them for almost 20 years now.
All right. So again, we're running a little bit over, so I'm gonna have Derek kind of go through radios for a hot minute.
So radios, who has a CB in their Jeep? Who does not have one? Okay. Of those of you who have CBs, who's tuning your antenna? So communications is important on the trail. This is CB 101, and it's more radio communications 101 because there's different ones that people are moving to and whatnot.
Why would you use a CB over the cell phone?
When you get on that mountain, you're not going to have service. You get on different places, you're not going to have
Exactly.
service.
90% of the trails you go on around Middle Tennessee, you will not have service.
Only thing
And
that phone's
even if
good
you
for
do,
is
you
taking
don't
pictures.
That's it.
And video.
Pictures and videos.
There's a lot of different CB styles. You'll see a lot of people with the antenna on their tailgate. There's old Cobra 29. Videos. There's a gray area around them, but for most of the off-road community, there's different sets of channels. They can be programmed through a computer. So you could use and there's some we're going to pass around. They can look different styles. One thing though to keep in mind, don't go to Walmart and buy the blister pack radios that it's an FRS. Those you wouldn't be able to reach on the top of Trail 1 from here. There's no range. The land factors into what kind of range you have. That's the same with CB too. If you're not familiar, squelch on your CB, you want to make sure you play around with that. That's where you're going to hear static. Because we've been on some rides before where the person at the front can't hear the person at the back because different CBs are tuned in different ways. So sometimes you might have to be the person in the middle relaying the communications. If you hear one person asking for, hey, where's Holly? Where's Holly? And Holly's not replying, but then Holly's saying something else, be that middle person. Don't be afraid to speak up on the CB to relay a message or say, hey, up front, can you hold back? We're getting out of range. And that,
If you've never talked on the CB, it's super weird because you're like, it's like talking to a microphone for the first time. It's like, I kind of feel awkward doing this, but you'll get over it real quick.
Hey, Derek.
Yeah.
Talking about your handheld radios like what you have, I'm starting to be more of a fan of those for a particular reason is I can, and I've got the one with the long mic, I can clip it on me, I can clip it on my shirt, and I can jump out and I can go run and spot somebody, and I've got communication with me, where if it was just a CB, it would be with the vehicle. And plus, when I'm all the way up the trail, spot somebody, I cheat and call back to Ginger and tell her to bring the Jeep up so I don't have to walk. So there's advantages.
Yeah.
And then, another thing, check your CB before you head up when you get to the park, because like mine, I have a big Wilson antenna. I did not realize, I went into a parking garage, I whacked the antenna, knocked everything out of tune. I didn't know it until I was up. And everybody was like, why do you sound like Charlie Brown's mom? You know, and I didn't check my CB before I headed up.
Which we touched on a while ago for what to do at the trailhead too.
Yeah.
That's prime example.
Well, and even before then, along that, with CB, grounding is key. You can't just put a CB in and expect for you to have good transmission. There's, not to get into much into the details, there's ways to test your antenna to be sure you have good connection. And that goes for any kind of radio and grounding. We just installed a CB in Beth's Jeep and they was sent the wrong mount. I tried to make it work. She could hear everything. She couldn't transmit at all because it wasn't grounded properly. Got the right mount, put it on there, and then it was perfectly dialed in.
I fought that same thing for about 2 years with mine. I
Yeah,
went through
so,
4 radios trying to figure it out.
A lot of the times you'll have to scrape the paint off the bolts, put a different bolt on just to get a good metal-to-metal connection. On mine, from inside my tailgate, I run a cord down through the inside of the Jeep down to the frame to be sure I have a good ground. I'm using a CB that actually is a lot more powerful than most because I find myself relaying a lot because I have 50 watts of power. So you can hear the top from down here.
So extra.
Hey.
Right?
But
Skynet's taking over his Jeep, I'm telling you.
So, and one real quick too, one thing that will affect the CB radio, and a lot of people don't realize it, but all these bumpers you buy now have got LED lights in them, right? You put LED lights on the back of your Jeep. When you touch the brake, if you've got your squelch down low, low to hear people, it'll trip your squelch. Your damn LED lights will. So LED lights affect the reception and the transmission of a CB.
not just that, if you have a radio in the front of a newer Jeep, you can cause your Jeep to light up like a Christmas tree when you transmit. It'll trip sensors, so keep that in mind as well. Who has questions? I mean,
yeah,
we don't want to get too much into the details. Have some sort of communication device. If you're planning a trip with friends, make sure you all have the same. Or we did a ride a couple months back. There was someone brand new, first time they'd come out. They had dealer drive-off tags. They didn't have a CB, so I gave them one of my handhelds. And then Beth was relaying from the passenger seat. We had CB, so she was relaying everything coming off the CB, so these new people weren't caught without communications. They'd never been on a trail. They had road tires. I mean, it was what this event is for, to kind of give that education, but they were just a little bit early.
Mm-hmm.
So,
does anybody have drive-out tags that's here today? I was going to give you an extra prize.
I do.
Yeah, I
Ben was probably the closest.
know, right? Is it drive-out tags?
No,
She don't qualify.
we transferred
Nope.
plates.
Okay.
So,
Anybody else have any other questions about radios? I encourage you to look at other people's rigs and see what you like, what you don't like.
and if you have a handheld radio that you bought because you saw someone had, they can be programmed. I have my computer here. I programmed Polly's this morning. I'm going to program another one for Kevin. There's some Jeeps and Wrenches channels. There's some other clubs channels that are programmed in. Then you just turn your radio to Jeeps and Wrenches 1 or Jeeps and Wrenches 5, and then you don't have to mess with frequencies or anything like that. You turn a knob and you're good to go.
Yes, is that a ham radio?
It's a ham radio that's being programmed to use FRS, GMRS, and other frequencies. Like the Jeeps and Wrenches are in some public subset of frequencies that's legal to use on any radio, but it's a weird frequency. It's not a normal ham band or anything like that.
Yeah, it's a super weird gray area that we don't like talking about.
Yeah, and for those that don't know, typically a ham radio you have to have a license for.
Oh,
That's
that's
how I
another
like
thing. GMRS ham, they both require a license of sorts. The new thing, like all the Jeep Jamborees are going to the GMRS, the Midland radios, the rugged radios. That does require a license that you and your family can use by purchasing. Ham radio requires a test and whatnot. If you're interested in those, Google's your friend. There's tons of resources for both. But in terms of riding on the trail, if you have a radio, it's better than nothing else. That's kind of where the things are going, but some of us keep all three. I think Kevin has all three types. I have all three in mine. So, and some people are anti-handheld radio and they bought their first one. So they'll be their first time using it.
Hey, I was just trying to be on the up and up, alright? You know what the Joneses, huh?